All right, everybody, welcome to the Service MVP podcast. My name is Joe Crisara, America's service sales coach, and I'm here with a great friend of mine. His name is Jim Klauck. Jim, say hi.
Hey, how you doing, Joe? It's great to be here, my friend.
Now, Jim has a business that he has, which helps you to differentiate your service. Matter of fact, the name of today's podcast is going to be How to Stand Out from the Pack. Jim, tell me about the service you provide and how you got into helping blue collar professionals, if you don't mind.
Sure. This goes back to 2005, Joe. As a homeowner, I had an issue. I had trouble finding good home service providers, good contractors. So I helped my neighbors out in my neighborhood by putting together something called Check-A-Pro. And at the time, it was kind of like Angie's List. And Angie's List wasn't as big as it is today. And I started this in Houston, Texas. Well, that was close to 20 years ago. And now we're nationwide with this. But what we do today is we help home service providers stand out from the pack by doing custom podcast sites for them and their business.
So a service business of any size can communicate through their words on a podcast so that you can use this in your local community or in the area to be able to put a voice to your company as opposed to just the brand and the images and things like that.
Exactly. So picture this. Let's say you're an HVAC company and you're out on that call and you're one of 3 or 4 bidding on this job. And the homeowner says, okay, so I found you on Google. I see you've got good reviews. Looks like you've got a decent vehicle. I see you've been in business for 20 plus years. Why should I hire you? Everyone says that they're great. They all have 100, 200, 500 reviews on Google, and they all seem to be like a 4.8 or higher. Why hire you? And when you have that podcast that's on Audible and Spotify and your own podcast site, and you can tell the homeowner, you look them right in the eye and you say, you know, Mr. Jones, about 3 months ago, we were talking about this on our podcast, talking about this unique type of job, because you know that you need a 5-ton downstairs and a 3-ton upstairs. Did you know that? No, he says. Well, you know what? We had a job just like this and we talked about it on the podcast, and you can hear all about how we helped Mrs. Smith with her job. So, Joe, when you do this, you're showing that you're competent and you're credible and you're doing something the other guys haven't done, because when Mr. Jones goes back and asks the other 3 companies to provide a podcast, they're like, we don't do that. You can't learn about us. No, we don't have it. So it allows you as a home service provider to stand out. You get credibility. You're on Google and you're on Apple Podcasts. You're on iHeart and Audible and Spotify. And there's backlinks going back to your website for SEO credibility. So there's all kinds of great stuff that just makes you stand out from the pack.
You know, it comes down to one word, which is research, right? Today's buyer is so sophisticated that they like to research, the people I'm inviting into my home and to learn a little bit more, because the problem is that there's nothing in the marketing that tells you anything really about who are the type of people I'm dealing with. The marketing and brand could look great, but then you get somebody who walks in the door who doesn't match that brand, right? So, and I remember, just to give you like a little heads up, I had back when I had my own service business, I put my image, my face in my advertising, and I said, Joe Crisara, I will personally see to your satisfaction, which is, I guess, my form of a podcast back then. Before it was back in the 90s, right?
Yeah, sure.
But it worked. It was like, man, when I saw you're putting yourself out there and speaking to me in that ad, it works. In a way, we've taken this to the next level where you are literally putting the voice to the company and sharing what's in your heart. So, Jim, by the way, the podcast that Jim produces this podcast. So if you like the way this sounds and the way that he does this, I'm a product of the product for Jim Klauck. And Jim, let me just say thank you for the service you provide, because you definitely make us sound very professional.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. And actually, what I do for you is just a little different from what I do for my home service clients, because you're more of a B2B and you're, helping people with their businesses, with their home service businesses as a coach. And what I do is I help that home service provider get out there in front to the homeowner and, be just a little bit different. Now, Joe, a lot of people say, I don't know how to do a podcast. I'm uncomfortable with a podcast. The good news is I've been doing this since 84. Now you're thinking 1984, there were no podcasts. The internet was barely alive back then. I all started with radio years ago. The Radio Pitchman is my other name. This is my book here. And it started back in 84. And I pretty much do the same thing. I've always put companies out in front. Used to do it with radio, still do some, but now we can do it with podcasts on all these great places like Audible and Spotify and Google and Apple Podcasts and iHeart. You name it, your podcast will be out there front and center. And I'm telling you, your competition isn't doing this.
Well, Jim, let's get started with the content. I want to get 3 things out of you that we can do to stand out from the pack as a service business. So what would you say the first thing that a service provider can do to use a service like this to stand out from the pack?
So what's great about having your own podcast, whether you do it through our services or you do it on your own, it shows credibility. It shows that you're an expert, and it shows that you're willing to stay on top of the things that are going on today. And in home service, most home service companies and individuals have traditionally been a little bit behind on the times. You'll find other industries that are further ahead. So you've got a guy who's been turning wrenches as a plumber for 50 years. And guess what? He knows how to turn the wrenches, but he's really not into the podcast thing. And he needs a lot of help with his website and social media. So when it comes to websites or podcast sites specifically, we can really help you. So if you want to get that credibility and be out there in front, don't worry about it. You can figure this out. I mean, look, Joe's all over the freaking internet, right? So if he can do it, right? All right, Joe, didn't used to turn wrenches.
at this advanced age, if somehow I can tap into something modern like this and be on, I can't believe people can just listen to me on their telephone and they get a sense of who I am. They get a sense of the kind of person they're going to deal with. If they like the tone, that they're going to be hearing, like they get a sample of the tone that as I give people advice over the air, they get a sample of what the kind of advice and what that tone's going to be like. Is this guy friendly? Is this guy suspicious? So what am I dealing with here? What kind of a tone am I got there? And so I think that's something you're able to do, which is express the tone of whatever the conversation is going to be. And people are like, in a way, like when I said before, I had my thing where I said I had my photograph and I will personally see your satisfaction. People are like, oh my God, I can't believe the Joe Crisara is at my house doing a call right now. And they're like, you're actually here, the guy on the advertisement. So in a way, I can see this really making that wow factor that, holy cow, aren't you, even if you had your sales team, like each person from your sales team do a podcast with them. Am I on the right track here that you can interview your own employees and maybe say something like that? And you can say, wow, you're the guy I heard, Ryan, the guy I heard on that podcast. Yeah, I was looking, I'm happy that I asked for you specifically, right? It can actually help the employee develop their own brand within that brand as well, too.
Absolutely. And you become kind of a celebrity. So here's what's really critical. And I want to move on to that next point if I can, which is
second point. Here we go. Point number 2. So number 1, it gets you credibility because you get that instant wow, right?
Yeah.
Number 2, what's number 2, Jim?
It's education. So picture this, everybody. And I'm going to put up a book. Some of you may have heard of Marcus Sheridan, a book called They Ask You Answer. Our friend Tommy Mello, Joe, turned me on to this, okay? And I will tell you what is so great about this book. They Ask You Answer is the idea of putting up frequently asked questions on your podcast site. And these aren't very long. These are like 3 to 5 minutes. And you ask questions like, is it better to have a tank or tankless water heater? People are wondering, what that is, because when they're cruising the web out there, they have these questions in mind. Well, they may see a number of your podcasts with these questions posed and answered by you. So they get to know you and hear you in this podcast library. It's education. So when they finally make that appointment and you come out to the home, they're like, you're the guy, just like Joe said a while ago, you're the guy I heard talking, and you answered all my questions. I went to all these other competitor sites, and they didn't even have answers to my questions. Today, people spend a lot of time researching. They don't spend a lot of time talking to you ahead of time. And wouldn't it be nice if when you went out on that sales call, that appointment, Okay. All the homeowner asked is, when can you do it? Wouldn't that be nice? When can you do it? Instead of asking all these questions that they would have had to ask you, but you've already answered the questions in what we call this podcast library. And it's a series of podcasts where you ask the question, it's a frequently asked question, and then you answer it. You're the expert. They want to hire you, Joe.
So in step number 2, you're saying to organize the information by the category of what you are saying. So for instance, if you're a plumber, it could be how to handle a slab leak in your home, or what to do when you get a slab leak, or tank or tankless, what's better? And then you're creating these mini subjects. If somebody calls you for an estimate on a tankless, you send it out to them. And they're kind of, in a way, so now it's like, well, what did you think of the information? Yeah, I listened to it. Man, I'm just ready to get this thing done now. Do you mention that? So those are good benefits you mentioned there. And so I get instant hot water. Yeah, if you want the system you put in, we can get instant hot water at your fixtures. Wow, that's crazy. So they're confirming what you've already heard. That's brilliant, Jim. I'd never even yeah, you're selling me right now. I'm selling myself on your service even more, Jim. I can't believe it. Can't believe it. I was already
Okay,
sold,
so
but have you on here. But this is really great information. And I think even if you were just you could see a company, but I could even see an individual salesperson doing something like this.
No, absolutely. And, here I am educating. We're talking about education. This is a book that's written by somebody I know. When can you do it? I just kind of mentioned that. And I actually wrote the foreword to this book. It's a sales book in home sales. Joe's very familiar with that type of thing. That's what he does, of course. And the guy who wrote this book, his name is Tom Decker. And years ago, we used to do a direct response radio program for him. We tripled his little business. He went from $900,000 a year within 12 months, Joe, to $3 million with direct response radio. It's the same type of thing. We did the answering of the questions. We did a 1-hour long radio show. We didn't take calls, because what we did is we used that time to ask the frequently asked questions and answer them. So when people heard us on the radio, they called, they knew what it cost, they knew how long it would take, they knew the owner, and all they asked was, when can you do it? And that's what we want in home service, right, Joe? We don't want to go there and have a long sales appointment. We want them to be ready to buy because we don't want to sell. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I think so. I think the more you can get that stuff out of the way, then it leaves oxygen in the room for creating a relationship and making a friendship, right? Because that's really kind of like the cherry on the top. The foundation is, does this guy know what he's doing? Do I believe this guy is credible and knows? Like, I'm getting one of the best people who understand how to do whatever trade, if it's garage door or whether it's plumbing or electrical or whatever. This guy knows what he's doing here, right? Which can be done, I think, on that podcast kind of a format where you're giving enough information about how it benefits the client to do things in a certain process. It can also talk about even the process of the way you deliver the information in the home, so people are kind of prepping themselves. I really think that's a great way, the educational part of it, which does make it sort of prepped to make that final choice of getting it done. So I think that's kind of pre-educating people to a level, right? And then the cherry on top is creating that relationship, I think. What is number 3, Jim? We on to number 3 yet, or what do you think? Is this we move on to the third?
Yeah, we better, because there's a lot here to unpack. There's just so much. Okay, so number 3 is what I call the SEO factor. And here's what's really cool. So when we do podcasts for our clients, and I recommend everybody who does their own podcast do this, make sure you just don't do a podcast that's just on your own podcast site. Make sure it's on Apple and Google and Audible and Spotify and iHeart. Get it on YouTube. We actually put these podcasts on YouTube as well for our clients, and now they're everywhere. And then we do something else that's kind of interesting. We transcribe everything. So make sure, everybody, you transcribe everything and put those transcriptions on Audible, on Google, on Apple, and also put backlinks back to your homepage on your main website. So now you've got like Google and Audible and Spotify and iHeart all backlinking back to you. And all of that gives you more credibility on the SEO side on these great podcast sites. I call them the podcast giants in my book. And by the way, Joe, can I can I plug my book a little bit more? Where did I put my book? Here it is. I'd love to give this to your listeners and viewers if they'd like that. May I do that? May I send this out to your people?
Absolutely, Jim. Anything that is free or included is always welcome. Always
Okay.
welcome, Jim.
Okay. Okay. Well, I would love to do it. And actually, on this video, if you're watching the video, my email address is on it, jim@theradiopitchman.com, jim@theradiopitchman.com. Send me an email and I'll send it to you. And this is a great way to learn how to do the podcast on your own. And I'd love to hop on a Zoom call and help you out. I love doing this for people. I've been in the home service business now since 2005 on the marketing side, helping home service professionals win more. And I would love to help you win more as well. So Joe, I think we covered the three.
Well, I do have a couple
the
more
credibility.
things, Jim. I do have something else for here. Yeah. I mean, I just want to give a testimony. Like, listen, you just start doing right now. We have our 5th podcast on it. So I see people got hundreds of them, right? I can only imagine what's going to happen when I have 100 podcasts. But right now we've only done 5 podcasts, right? I can't believe, Jim, the sales we've already received where people are like, I'm just ready to purchase. What you said is true. I mean, I can be a testimonial for that people are like, you know what? I just heard you on the podcast. Give me the prices so we can get this thing started. I'm ready to go. And I never even mentioned the coaching. Like I just like product place it in there. I don't say about the prices or anything like that. So people are like, yeah, I looked into it and I just want to get this thing done. So that's number one. But here's the biggest thing about the SEO. I'd like to touch on that. If you search Joe Crisara podcast, it used to be like a plethora of podcasts, like Tommy Mello, Cristiano, these people would interview you too. You interviewed me too, Jim. So I have a lot of but now at the very top of the list comes the Service MVP podcast with Joe Crisara. And if you type in just Joe Crisara, that also brings, so very quickly, I within 5 weeks, you are just search my name and the Service MVP podcast comes to the top of the list. Jim, I want to say that is a great testimony because I see a lot of people who do websites who can never make that kind of an impact. So probably because you got it under so many different media channels that it has makes this SEO really pop. I think there's no faster way to get somebody to the top of that search engine than if you were to put that in there. And of course, you can. I told Jim it says sales training podcast. We put in Service MVP sales training podcast with Joe Crisara. It's kind of a long title, but that is searchable. If you type sales training, it will come up as well. So Jim, I just want to say well done on that. And it has made a big impact on that part of it. So, but do me a favor, tell me on the home service front, what kind of number, what kind of people, how many people would listen to a contractor talk about his services? Do you have any kind of numbers for us or any kind of statistics or data or case studies that you can share with us that might make an impact?
On how many people listen to the podcast?
Just how many, or it's just the impact of the podcast. If you can give us any kind of a case study or something like that, a little bit more on that if you can, yeah.
It's huge. So I have all these like little individual case studies, which are pretty much clients that really love doing the podcast with us at Check a Pro. And if I may, I'll just tell you quickly how we do this. I generally help my clients by interviewing them as a third-party endorsement. So on the radio, I'll call myself Check a Pro Joe, and it sounds like it's an excerpt from my radio show. And it's this podcast site we build for plumbers and HVAC companies and roofers and so forth. And, Joe, to answer your question, it comes back in so many ways. Some people say, I just love this thing because it gives me great credibility and my competition doesn't have it. Some people say, I just love the SEO factor. When I type in my name, like, Joe Blow or, Acme Windows, my company and my name show up right there at the top of Google. And it just goes on and on. There's just so many different aspects to it. It's so different than just a regular website. And I'll tell you something that's really interesting that we found. It's like a backup website. So if anything ever happened to your website, you've got a podcast site with your name and your logo all over it with your phone number and links back to your homepage. But my point is if your website ever went down, it's an extra website, it's a podcast site. And Joe, I'm sure you'll agree, when you go to your podcast site, it's basically a website built for podcasts, but it has all your information on there.
Yeah, so it's like a mini website, probably one that might be more valuable than your actual website, because it seems like we've been working with the SEO of our company for years and we still have a hard time getting it to the top. It is that now it comes to the top automatically within about 5 weeks. It has, of course, when you search service MVP, which before you search service MVP, we weren't, it was mixed in with a bunch of other stuff that said MVP and service and everything like that. So definitely I can see that being there. Jim, is there a place that people can go? Because one of the things they're going to say is like, I know they can get a hold of you and talk about it, but they probably want to see some research again. They want to do the research. Is there a place on your Check a Pro website that you can go look and see clients that have succeeded and maybe check out some of their podcasts and listen in to see what this experience would look like?
Yeah, here's the best way. Okay, this is really easy. Go to theradiopitchman.com and you can just Google it. Just type in, Radio Pitchman, the Radio Pitchman, and you will see our podcast site. And on that podcast site, you'll learn more about us, but you'll also get a flavor of each one of our clients because they're all listed there and you can listen to their podcasts.
Oh, that's great. So that's a great way that people can kind of see if this is right for them. Truthfully, I have listened in on some of those, and I can't see how you wouldn't think it's right for you, because this is a way you can speak directly to the public and educate the public to whatever degree you want to let them know what's inside your heart and what's inside the culture of your company, so they can feel that warm, fuzzy feeling when you get to their house. Does that make sense, Jim?
Absolutely. And I just want to say something, because I know a lot of people have trepidation. They're like, I'm just a guy who turns wrenches, right? I'm not a guy who's this media guy. It's not that difficult, and I can really help you with it. And it's kind of like dancing. Someone who's never danced before, if you have a really good dance partner, you don't have to worry about it, because that person will lead. And I can lead you through this. Whether you want to do one on your own or you want to do it through our platform, that's fine. But I would love to help you out. And certainly email me at Jim@the-Radio-Pitchman to get my free book. By the way, Joe, if you go to Jim@the-Radio-Pitchman, you can listen to the audio version of the book. And the book is short. It's 20 minutes long. Invest 20 minutes in listening to a few chapters. You'll love it.
Jim, let me just say again, thank you so much for the time and this information, the education you've given us today. You're a product of the product. I can see that. And it's going to help so many contractors communicate to their clients what their company is actually about, and put that voice, literally, when your advertising is supposed to speak to the clients, you literally can speak to your clients using your service. And definitely, I highly recommend it for everybody to look into this to see if it is right for you.
Joe, I really appreciate the opportunity. This is fantastic. Thank you so much for letting us do your podcast. It's a great opportunity. As a matter of fact, what's great about doing Joe's podcast, everybody, is because we actually, do the editing and we post it everywhere and so forth. We get to learn a whole lot more here at our offices because we actually get to look at it and listen to it. So the education on Joe's podcast, like what we're doing today, is invaluable for all of you home service providers. So continue to subscribe, watch it, and listen to it.
Don't forget to contact Jim at Jim@the-radiopitchman.com, right? I have
That's
that right?
it, buddy. Yes, sir.
All right, guys. Have a great one, everybody. We'll talk to you next episode.